This video I'm going to give you an current update of the situation with Old Crow's Classic Cars, as well as talk a little bit about what it's like to run a business, a small business in my case, and our businesses, as well as telling you guys a little bit about me, about myself. So first of all, Old Crow's, I'll go back a bit more. I started my first business when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and I realized that I would actually sell bread at school, kind of a special kind of bread, like with filling, with like a filling inside and a cheese filling inside. And I started because I realized that there was a demand for it. During recess, kids would go out to buy food from the canteen, and you'd get this, there's just one canteen for the whole school, so you'd get this big lineup, and not everybody would be able to get food from the canteen, or the least, it would take very long. So I realized that there was a need for that, and that I could supply that need. And that's the kind of basic principle, the basic concept for any business. A few years later, actually quite a few years later, I created Old Crow's Classic Cars, probably just a bit before, or you could say a bit after, a short time after I dropped out of university. I didn't see myself as working for anybody, and I didn't see myself working an office job, which is what I would have gotten if I had stayed in university. After that, it took a few years for the business to get well known enough to the point where I could actually get a reasonable amount of income from it. And since I started all this when I was pretty much a teenager, you get to the point where it's really hard, it's very, very hard to start a business from scratch, from the backyard, like I did. So one of the main problem that I had was nobody knew I existed, and advertising is the blood of the business. But you need to have money to make advertisement, and the money comes from the business, so it kind of gets into a vicious circle. But a few years later, here I am. I've had, and I still have potential and current clients for the cars, but I'm now at a transition point. So what it's like to own a business. I worked for the great majority of my life, I worked for somebody else. I've worked normal jobs, regular jobs, like everybody else. I worked mainly in construction, all sorts of construction jobs, odd jobs. And then now and then I'd have my own side gigs. I would tutor mathematics, I even tutored chemistry a few times. I even chauffeured for a wedding. And when you're working a normal job, just a regular job, you don't earn nearly as much money as the business owner, but you don't have nearly as much responsibility. When you're working a normal job, you go in 7 to 5, you do whatever the job, whatever labor it is that you do. You go back home, and you get up again next day, that's it. You don't worry about clients, you don't worry about the rent, you don't worry about anything. You just show up and do the work. Now when you're trying to start a business, there's an infinity of other things that you're responsible for. Your responsibility goes from 0 to infinite. You have to worry about rent, you have to worry about potential clients, you have to talk to clients. If you get sick or you don't feel good, the business stops. You got to pick something up. You got to be there. You got to stop what you're doing to go pick something up. You got to worry about materials. You got to worry about where you get your welding wire from, in my case. You got to worry about how to transport a car. You got to worry about who's going to tow your vehicle. There's a whole bunch of different things that you're now responsible for. And guess what? Those things, they don't pay. you don't make any money from those problems. So you have a whole bunch of other issues that you now have to consider. And the other big problem that I had with the start of the business is you don't get paid until you sell the car. So when I buy my own cars and restore them and then resell them, you only get paid at the very end. Whereas if you're working on someone else's car, a car that already has an owner, then you're kind of getting paid right away. But I started with my own cars because I needed to have something to show for. If you go to a classic car shop, they're always going to have at least one car on show for display, right? If you show up, in my case, I had nothing. I was young, I was inexperienced, you could say. I didn't have a proper place. I worked, if you watch some of my videos on YouTube, I worked outside in the backyard. So a lot of people, I had a few people that would show up, they'd look at me, they're like, oh, how old are you? Or where is your shop? Even though I did a better job than a lot of shops, people judge you by your appearances. It's a sad fact of life, but it's a fact, it's true, it's out there, you just got to deal with it. But finally, years later, I've reached a point where the business has been quite successful, and it has allowed me to go into the next, to take it to the next level. Now, more than being a mechanic or a restorer, I'm an entrepreneur. And this ties into what I said, that there's a lot of other things going on with the business. So about 2 years ago, probably around the time when I did my last video, my last car video of a full car, I was living at a place that was rented. And all of a sudden came the boom of the real estate market. So all of a sudden what happened is the landlord said, okay, you've got 1 month to leave. And all of a sudden my business was pretty much at a pivotal point where it was going to end. Once again, I was at that point. So I had this dream. I've always had this desire of owning my own land. And to me, it's just terrible that in the 21st century, a basic necessity, a basic human necessity of owning a home, a basic place to live, has become so difficult. To me, it seems stupid that people have to spend over 30, up to maybe 50 years to pay up a mortgage for a home. But I was able to sell the car that I had, my project car, and we were able to pull through a miracle of buying my own land. Now the problem with that is, again, everything is connected when it comes to a business. There's a lot of variables, a lot of things that come into play. So you wouldn't really think that the real estate market would impact a car business, but it does. But fortunately, I was able to pull together all the funds that I had. I spent every single dollar that I had on purchasing my property. I was left without a dollar. But fortunately, we have family. I have a good family, and they were able to support me. But it was an emergency. It was an emergential. It was an emergency situation. Because if I hadn't found the property, I would have had to sell or maybe scrap all the tools, equipment, and even cars that I had. Right? Because I couldn't afford a property or a house, a regular house with a yard big enough to allow me to keep working with cars. So the property that I purchased, it's vacant land. It's over 10 acres. And that's kind of shifted my business to another business. So it's a very good location. And as of this moment, all of the cars, all my vehicles and tools are in storage at the property. Unfortunately, it's just vacant land. Right now, at this moment, it's just forest. So there's no way that I can work with any vehicles there. I can maybe make some small repairs, I can make some adjustments, but apart from that, there's not much more I can do. And because you can't, even though it's such a big property, there's no way you can actually get vehicles into the property at this time. Because there's trees, there's rocks, there's ditches, there's big stones, and there isn't a firm place to work on. Like, you can't set a jack anywhere because the jack would just sink into the ground. And there's no power. There's no electricity. So I'm at a point where I have to wait. The business that's going to take over now is the construction business. So my project for this year is to finally build a proper place to restore cars. And not only that, build a small home and then sell it. So that goes into what I said before, is that more than a mechanic, I'm an entrepreneur. I also now have 2 large trucks, so that's going to be another business. So at this time, Old Crow's Classic Cars is at shall we say, a standstill until I actually have some power, some electricity, and something a bit more set up before I can actually